The FBI's most wanted list features 2 Arizona fugitives.
Cold-blooded killers, and I think they fit the profile of a sociopath with very little conscience other than their own well-being. So these particular individuals, being smart, being sociopathic, they are extremely dangerous and extremely difficult to track.
And one of the agents behind the arrest of one of the nation's most notorious killers.
And I said to myself, my God, is that what we've been searching for 17 years? Because it was hard to comprehend that the filthy, wild-looking person that we saw stick his head out of that cabin that day could possibly have been the person that had avoided detection for 17 years.
Plus, Arizona border sheriffs meet with the governor. This is Arizona Week. The FBI Top 10 Most Wanted list features the most dangerous fugitives in the country. 2 men from Arizona are on that list, and both committed heinous crimes in the state. Here's Andy Black, an FBI Assistant Special Agent in charge.
That's a list that was started by J. Edgar Hoover back in the 50s, and it's reserved for some of the most dangerous criminals. Traditionally, it started in the gangster era, late 30s, early 40s. And eventually it became ingrained as part of FBI tradition, Top 10 Most Wanted. Typically it was murderers. We also have a Top 10 for terrorism as well. So we have 2 Top 10 lists these days.
Arizona has 2 suspects on the top 10 list. How unusual or unique is that?
That's quite unusual to have 2 individuals from the same state, and they've been on the list for quite a while. So we'd be very interested in any help we could get from the public in capturing these 2 individuals. They're both armed and dangerous, and they committed terrible crimes, and we'd like to see them locked up where they belong.
Talk about Robert William Fisher first. Tell us about his case.
Robert William Fisher, he was living in Scottsdale, Arizona. Back in April of 2001, he committed a horrible murder, murdered his wife and 2 children. Mary Cooper's his wife. They met in 1987, got married. Early 2001, they were having marital problems. In April 9th of 2001, she told him she wanted a divorce. The very next morning, April 10th, she was shot in the back of the head, killed. The 2 children, Brittany and Bobby, aged 12 and 10, they were stabbed to death. Their bodies, both Mary Cooper and the 2 children, their bodies were doused in an accelerant inside the house. The accelerant was spread throughout the house, and the house was rigged to explode. It exploded, the house practically burned to the ground. Their charred bodies are recovered, and Fisher became a suspect immediately.
Talk about Jason Derrick Brown.
Jason Brown is an interesting individual. He's been wanted by the FBI since November of 2004. He's wanted and he's been charged with murder and armed robbery. Back on November 29th, 2004, an armed guard, Robert Palomares, was ambushed. He was shot and killed in cold blood. He was carrying the deposits from the weekend of a movie theater, local movie theater in Phoenix, Arizona. He was left for dead. Brown became the suspect immediately. He's a fluent French speaker. He spent 2 years as part of a mission in Paris, France, back in 1988 to 1990, and there he became a fluent French speaker. He's resided in Utah, Arizona, and in coastal communities in Southern California. We believe he's likely living either in Arizona, possibly in Utah. He is a high roller, and what's interesting about Brown is he portrayed himself as being very wealthy, and he did so in order to obtain loans from banks, and so he can live a lavish lifestyle. He was known for dressing very, very expensively, driving expensive cars, participating in expensive hobbies, skiing, jet setting around. So he could be anywhere, particularly since he speaks a foreign language fluently. The best evidence we have at this point that he might be in Utah, Arizona. However, it's been a long time, and he could be anywhere.
How is it these guys are able to stay off the radar for so long?
The smarter ones and the more skilled ones are harder to capture. The individuals we're discussing today, Brown and Fisher, you know, they've got, let's take a look at Brown here. He's got education, he's got some money that he's gotten from banking institutions and from his armed robbery, and he's lived overseas. He's got a skill set that he can utilize to evade the police better than someone with a lesser education or lesser means. The same with Fisher. Fisher's an individual who's worked in a variety of fields as a firefighter, in the medical industry. He's got outdoor survival skills. He's very adaptable to his environment. He can live in a variety of locations, and he's intelligent as well.
Is it unusual to have this idea that one or both might still be in Arizona where they committed their crimes? Or is that common?
Well, anytime we have a fugitive from justice, we start with where they resided last. And invariably, they return to where they lived, whether they're living here permanently or passing through occasionally. You know, familiarity breeds comfort. And a lot of we see this over and over. Individuals we're looking for as fugitives either reestablish residence in the state where they last lived, or at least come back and visit associates or friends that they have here. That's very common, and that's why any lead we can get in this area and Utah, since those were his last two residences for Brown particularly, would be very helpful.
One of the FBI's most high-profile arrests was that of the Unabomber Ted Kaczynski, a man who had murdered 3 people and injured more than 20 others. Retired FBI agent Max Knoll was one of the arresting agents and recently spoke in Tucson and shared background on the case.
He was paranoid schizophrenic. He was diagnosed by psychiatrists as being a paranoid schizophrenic, but he knew the difference between right and wrong, and he took extreme steps to avoid detection. He took extreme steps to void crime scene investigators he had, for instance, he had the FBI fingerprint manual that I got when I went through training school in his cabin. He understood latent fingerprints. He understood how government workers are fingerprinted. So, you know, he avoided detection with fingerprints because he treated everything that he used. He was initially known as the junkyard bomber. He wasn't always known as a Unabomber. Unabomber is an acronym that we give to cases when they become a major case. And in the FBI, that doesn't just mean a big case, that means a case that has a specific connotation. Previous to that, as I said, he was known as a junkyard bomber because everything that he was making his bombs out of, you could find on a construction debris file. Most bombers go to a hardware store and buy pipes. They buy screw-on caps for the pipes. They buy switches from Radio Shack and so on and so forth. He didn't do any of that. He found stuff and adapted it to making bombs, which was untraceable, which was one of the things that made him very difficult to find.
The brother helps you locate him in this cabin in Montana. Mm-hmm. And then you can't just, as I read, you can't just go into this small town and set up an FBI task force. You had to do some pretty extraordinary things as an agent. Tell me about that.
The FBI traditionally, to solve cases, throws manpower at everything. Flood the area, lots of agents go out, pound the pavement, do lots of interviews. And I said, this is not going to work in Helena, Montana, let alone in a little dinky community called Lincoln, Montana. So if you want me to go up and do it, I only want a very minimal amount of people. And contrary to what you've read in most of the press releases and all the books that were written until the book that we wrote, you will find that the only agents that went up there were 4 of us. Myself, a man-wife team, and a former Montana resident who's an FBI agent, a former Marine. We then brought into the fold one additional person, a postal inspector. And that was all we had for months in Montana to conduct the appropriate investigation. We didn't drive normal FBI type cars. We rented vehicles from a company up there I think was called Rent-A-Dent. And we drove old beat up jalopies that fit into the rural mountain community instead of four-door Crown Vic police vehicles.
The moment you decide we're going to get him,
The media had been tracking us, and we knew that. And the principal tracker was 60 Minutes and Dan Rather. And almost simultaneous, Dan Rather approached Louis Freeh in Washington, D.C., the director of the FBI, and his counterpart, Lowell Bergman, who was his investigative reporter on the West Coast, approached my boss, Jim Freeman, saying, aha, we know you guys have a prime suspect named Krasinski, and he lives somewhere outside Lincoln, Montana. And unless you let us go with you when you serve the warrant, we're going to run the story next Sunday night. We knew his cabin didn't have electricity. We knew his cabin probably didn't have a TV set, but we were fearful because of some of the things that he had written and what have you, that he had the ability to monitor the news, which he did. He had a radio, battery-operated radio in there that he was watching and listening. And so we had to speed it up because we had to do it before 60 Minutes had a chance to run that program. Now, if you go to the official FBI files, there was a press release that Louis Freeh made that said, oh no, that didn't occur. And there were press releases from Dan Rather and Lowell Bergman saying, oh no, that didn't occur. But believe me, it occurred. And I don't have an IQ of 170 like Ted Kaczynski, but there's no way that this old, fat FBI agent is going to walk across 40 yards of expanse exposing himself to the most successful booby trapper in the history of the United States who's killed 3 people and is becoming more and more proficient at it if I didn't have to, which is exactly what we did. Because we had to, because we were fearful that he would hear the news reports and beat it. And later we found out he had all kinds of other cabins that he had built up in the surrounding mountains that were all stockpiled with food that he had, like macaroni and things like that, that would keep with weapons and ammunition and fishing equipment and so forth, so that if he got wind of somebody gun, he was out of there and we'd still be looking for him today.
Knowles says his team worked with area law enforcement and a local landowner to keep track of Kaczynski until April of '96, when they made the arrest at his cabin in Montana.
And we got to a clearing, which Kaczynski's cabin was, you could see it from the clearings about 40 yards away. And Butch's dog, Curly Sue, took off and scared a yearling deer up, and the deer went bounding across in front of the cabin, and the dog is yapping right behind it, chasing it. And that got Kaczynski's attention, and he opened the door to his cabin and stuck his head out. And there we were out in the middle of nowhere. And Butch sees him and says, hey, Ted, how you doing? He goes, hi. Closed the door and went back in. And I said to myself, my God, is that what we've been searching for 17 years? Because it was hard to comprehend that the filthy, wild-looking person that we saw stick his head out of that cabin that day could possibly have been the person that had avoided detection for 17 years.
and that was him.
That was him.
You probably went back and contacted your team and said, I've seen him, we've got to go get him?
Yeah, and I had a physical description now of the cabin.
So tell me about when you said we're going to you didn't knock on the door.
No, yeah, you don't knock
How'd
on
you get in there?
You don't knock on a door in a wilderness. You hail people, you know. You're going on their property. You don't have permission. You're trespassing. You have to, you know. So we hailed him. As we approached the cabin, our story was, and Jerry would introduce us, and he was in full uniform with the United States Forest Service policeman's uniform, and Ted knew him, was going to introduce us as members of the mining company that had leased the mining rights that coming summer, and that we were looking for his corner posts to ensure that our employees, when they came up during the summer, stayed off of his property. And even though it was early April, this whole canyon was full of snow. It was about 3 or 4 feet deep in some areas. So as we left the trail, Jerry began to hail him to get his attention, to give us permission to come to the cabin. And we were getting no response from the cabin. And it wasn't until we were within a few yards of the cabin that we could hear somebody moving around in there, even though we knew he was in there because of reports we had from Butch and from various other things. And so we heard him. And the plan was, if we get within arm's reach of him, grab him. And as we got up right toward the front of the cabin door came open, and Ted Kaczynski stuck his head out and said, "Yeah?" And Jerry Burns, in effect, said, "Hi, Mr. Kaczynski, Jerry Burns, United States Forest Service. I'm here with these gentlemen from so-and-so mining company, and we're looking for your corner post to ensure that their people don't come on your property." He said, "Well, my corner posts are clearly marked." And Jerry said, "Well, that very well may be, Mr. Kaczynski, but they're under snow right now, and Butch has told us how protective you are of your property. We don't want to wait around on your property trying to find them. It would be helpful if you came out and showed us." And he made his critical mistake by saying, "Well, okay." And he took one step toward Jerry Burns, which put him within arm's reach. And then he said words to the effect, and I can't really remember. Jerry remembers one thing, I remember another. He said, "Let me get my coat." And he took his attention away from Jerry and started to turn to go back in the cabin, and Jerry snatched him out of the cabin, just pulled him out. And he started fighting and wrestling, and Tom McDaniel wrapped him up, and the three of them were wrestling around, and I got the privilege of walking around in front of him with my Sig Sauer P226 and stuck it in his nose and held my credentials up so he could see him and said, "Mr. Kaczynski, FBI."
What did
And
he
he
say?
quit. Nothing. He quit fighting, he quit resisting, and off we went with him.
He had been living in a cabin for how long? I mean, he was not
Since
kept.
the late 70s.
He was not kept. Tell me about what he was
His
not.
clothing was rotting off of him. Since we had been up there since early February, he had not been out of the confines of his cabin, or his 1.4 acres, all the time we were there. He hadn't gone to town, he hadn't done anything. He was in the cabin busily constructing a bomb. His clothing was rotting off of him. He had probably a 16th or an 18th inch of foul-smelling grime all over his body. It smelled terrible. His hair was unkempt and wild. It was not the picture of a person with a former mathematics professor at the University of California, Berkeley, and a PhD in mathematics from the University of Michigan and an undergraduate degree from Harvard. It just wasn't the image that you conjure up in your mind of what you're looking for when you finally get him.
This man is a genius. Are you surprised that he fell for this scheme of we're just looking?
I was very proud. He told me later in the day, out of the clear blue sky, he looked at me and he said, "You know, that was a really good ruse you used to get me out of the cabin. That's about the only way I would have come out." So he paid me a backhand compliment.
What was the most interesting thing you learned about this person?
Before we identified him, or afterwards, I guess. They're different things. Before we identified him, the efforts to which he went to avoid detection, unbelievable. After we identified him, the fact that a person would lead such a Spartan life to achieve a goal of killing people that he didn't like, that were representational of things he didn't like. He dedicated, we know from his writings now, we took 40,000 pages or something of writing out of his cabin. He wrote down everything, his autobiography and so forth. We know precisely why he did what he did and when he did it. He committed himself when he was in graduate school at the University of Michigan getting his PhD to making enough money where he could go to the wilderness, buy a place in the wilderness, and begin a campaign of killing people he didn't like. And he left the University of Michigan with his PhD, came to the University of California at Berkeley on a full track of a professor, and taught long enough to get what he figured was a nest egg. He went to Western Canada and tried to buy a place in Western Canada, and even though he had 170 IQ, he didn't understand that the Canadians wouldn't let him buy a place in Canada, so he came back to the United States and ended up in Montana, and that's where he decided to settle and do his campaign of terrorism.
Ted Kaczynski pleaded guilty and is serving 8 life sentences without the possibility of parole in a Colorado supermax prison. The Buzz now with my colleague Nancy Montoya here at Arizona Public Media. Nancy, we're standing here outside the state building where the governor just met with 4 of the border sheriffs, and they're talking about the border strike force.
They are, and one of the big problems with the strike force and the whole idea of having a border strike force is that there has been a lack of communication, a lack of transparency from the governor's office, and the 4 border sheriffs have come here and hoping to have an open dialogue with the governor, hoping to have an open dialogue that would at least give them some parameters of what's happening.
We always hear they have these meetings, but does anything actually come of the meeting? Any specifics that you were able to get?
There were a couple of specifics. The big one is that with Sheriff Estrada from Santa Cruz County, his big concern is that on I-19 from 2 in the morning until 6 in the morning, DPS goes home. So there is no DPS coverage on that freeway. They've addressed that problem, and Commander Milstead has said, we know it's a problem and we're going to get to it. We're going to see that it's fixed.
So Nancy, we collectively spoke with Director Milstead and all 4 border sheriffs about their thoughts on this meeting. We didn't get to the governor, though.
We did not get to the governor. However, we did note that there was a lot of apprehension going into the meeting. We spoke to all 4 before they walked into the meeting, but after they walked out, it was a whole different story.
Well, what the governor has asked is to work with DPS in regards to what are our individual needs for each of the counties that they could help with. Obviously, the ones that they could do right away, we expressed, and that was having the federal government, do their job. We in law enforcement, immigration is not anything we want to be involved in, nor never will. Homeland security is vitally important, and it's important that we put the pressure on the feds to do their job. And if the sheriffs don't get that, and we have to pick up that slack. And the governor has fought, and he's going to continue to fight for getting reimbursement for the counties when it comes to like SCAP, the State Criminal Alien Apprehension Program. So he's fighting alongside of us and pushing that with the feds so that we can get that reimbursement so our communities aren't footing the bill for what the feds are supposed to do and say they are supposed to do.
Most of the issues that were mentioned on that letter, obviously, the communication, the funding, a lot of the issues that were outlined on that letter from all of the sheriffs were being addressed, and we were very happy to hear that. What was refreshing too was the fact that they're going to go back and they're going to listen to us, which they did there. That's a commitment that the governor made. I will be listening to you. Nobody knows more about the issues along the border than you do, and we want to work with you on that. So that was very refreshing. So they will be checking with us, and we will be making a wish list of some of the things that we feel we need, at least in Santa Cruz County. For myself, I say we're a poor county. We need resources. That's one thing we need. We need people out on the highway, and we need people to be involved in the task force. Those are the kind of things that will help us a lot.
Each county on the border has its respective needs and wishes, and so we're already doing that in Cochise County. That's why we were maybe singled out a little bit as some of the assessments we're doing. But I'm very proud to say our 4 border sheriffs, along with I think our Arizona Sheriff Association, which is going to be following on this when it comes to the meetings, and our governor and his staff, DPS, we're in this together. We are. And as leaders within communities, if we're not, we're failing the people we serve. So I'm very excited about where this is going to go.
We're all cops, and cops support each other. There's just no getting beyond that. The young men and women out on the streets have to get along, and they do. They always have, always will. At this level, at my level, and I'm new to this game, we're going to bump heads, and that's understandable, and that's okay. It's a matter of policy and understanding, and really it comes down to communication. The governor came down. I applaud him for that. We've always thought that it was a good idea that the governor's interested in the border situation here. We just felt like he needs to ask us what are the strategies, the best way to deal with border issues, not come down and just tell us this is what we're going to do. And I think we've gotten to that point. We're at a position now where we're going to sit down with, public safety. I tell everybody, there should never be a letter, a D or an R, in front of a sheriff's name. I'm sorry. My position is, when it comes to law enforcement, we are apolitical. You have to be.
We as state law enforcement, our job is to protect our residents. So if it's not going to be done at the federal level to the standards in which we want, what can we do, and what is that effort that we put forward? And that's what this is about. The sheriffs and the DPS, I think there's a misnomer that somehow we're not connected on this. We are all very much connected on this, and it's really that it's not a cookie cutter approach. It's each county has specific interests in this, and we will go back and try to further identify those. We've already done very good with Cochise County. We've been our most effective there. It's how do we now hit these other 3 border counties and make it more effective for them. So what was perceived as a disconnect is not a deep issue within us. I mean, we're very much in alliance that something has to be done.
So we heard varying viewpoints
We
there,
did.
but it seems like this is a good first step in the right direction.
Make no mistake, this was not a love fest between the governor and the 4 border sheriffs. However, what did happen is that the lines of communication are now open. Now we need to see if the governor follows through with some of the promises he made.
We're also hearing that there is somebody who's missing from this conversation.
Right, a glaring omission from this conversation are the police force for the Tohono O'odham Nation. They have a huge strip of land along the border. They have a lot of problems with drug trafficking, with illegal entry. They were not at the table.
So what's next? We know that those folks are missing from a meeting like this, but what happens next? The legislature starts up in January?
We have the state legislature is going to look at this plan. However, at this point where we stand now, we still don't have a budget and we still don't have an active plan in place.
It's a big deal for the governor to come down and meet with these border sheriffs and hear directly from them.
It sure is, and it was a big deal to them. There were maybe 12 people in the room. And one of the biggest frustrations I think that all of the border sheriffs have had is that they feel like they are being disrespected and not being heard. Sheriff Estrada told me at one point, it's like somebody's throwing this huge party in your home, but they forget to invite you to attend. He feels now that he's been invited to attend the party in his home.
Okay, this could be the first step toward seeing some more border security in Arizona.
We can only hope.
Nancy Montoya at Arizona Public Media, thank you for your analysis. And thank you so much for joining us. Arizona Week will take a holiday break and we'll see you back on January 8th. For all of us at Arizona Public Media, happy holidays.